Dr. Phil, how are you?
Just fine, man. How are you?
I'm so excited I can call you Dr. Phil. Obviously, Dr. Phil Bass.
Please don't tell me your problems about emotions and things.
I have a problem with this animal. That's what I have. Your book was great, and especially starting off by helping the reader understand, like, okay, there's a lot going on here with cows, the history of cows. I like I was at the point when you brought up the Wagyu cattle and how it's like the gold standard.
Yeah.
Just like nuggets of meat amongst the fat.
Yeah. The Holy Grail, right?
Right. I appreciate that, especially since agriculture in the United States has become this really contentious thing, right? Understanding what goes into it, understanding the mechanisms that produce the quantities of meat that we eat, what the history of the cows are, like how we came to these really large. Somebody was telling me recently, like, the cows in Europe are smaller because of those. It's like, I can't with you. Anyway, so listen, you have more information that we can cover in this conversation, but what I'd love to hear is, like, how did we come to this point with the cow? Right.
Yeah.
And like, obviously it's not a cow.
It's
right?
not a cow.
It's a lot of things, but help me understand that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, first, let me give a little background. I was 2020, that was an interesting time that most of us are trying to forget. But 2020 allowed for us to have extra time to call family. And so we were doing just that. And I had still have a cousin, and love that cousin dearly. But they have very different perspective on agriculture. And were telling me about how livestock are raised and how we need to be, putting cattle out into the wild and into forested areas and grazing them on grass. I said, well, if I show you outside, like, that's exactly what's happening with mine right now. And pretty much all of this country is that we start them out on grass and everything. And we were talking just a lot about the science of what it takes to raise livestock in this country. And that goes off into areas of just agriculture in general. And after we hung up, it was love you, man. And we're moving on. And, I was driving to work, one day and it was just an epiphany. It's something hit me and the right neurons connected in my brain and said, you know what? I can't get the story across to a person that I've grown up with, let alone, spend enough time to explain, livestock in general to the general populace. But I think if I wrote this down in a easy to read format, that we might be able to start sharing the story of animal agriculture. And that's where the book came from. It's not a cow. And the whole premise behind that. And for those who are in the agriculture industry, we realize that if most anybody who's not with livestock, points to anything that moos and has four legs, a cow. Well, right. That's not true. And then it goes well beyond that. It's all the cool things that, livestock in general, but cattle specifically can do that we can't do. And so more towards your question of how did we get to, modern day cattle and why are they so much bigger than they are in Europe? And I find that kind of funny because I go to Europe regularly. I work with cattle producers over there, and there's some pretty darn big animals over there as well. And really it's coming down to, we're just getting better at selective breeding, picking the right bull and the right cow that are more efficient, that are going to better utilize the resources that are given to them to grow more efficiently. We do have some really cool technologies that we can use to make cattle bigger, but that's not the reason that they're a lot bigger than they were since the 1950s. On average, we add about 5 pounds of carcass weight, linearly 5 pounds of carcass weight to beef carcasses each year. That's not something you can do with pharmaceuticals. That is entirely breeding and management, and that's where we're really excelling in the United States with cattle.
Understood.
Yeah.
When I was in college, okay, and I went to Berkeley. I did not care for Berkeley, the place.
I won't hold it against you, but
appreciate you. Thank you. I went to Berkeley. I went as a math major, but then I switched to rhetoric. Rhetoric is obviously a liberal arts.
Sure.
And because of that, I ended up in some like goofy classes where I'm just trying to understand how to communicate better and how to organize my thoughts better. Yeah. One book we had to read was My Year of Meats by Did you ever hear this book? Okay. So I won't give
to read it.
Yeah. But ultimately it worked to vilify the cattle industry and the meat producing industry, in that at the end of the book comes when this journalist who's going around, that's the protagonist, journalist going around interviewing people about different, recipes and all these different things. And then it circles back with this cattle producer who he's like bragging to her how they're mixing in cement into the cattle feed, and his daughter, or it's like his daughter or his niece or something, is like entering puberty really early because like of all the things they're shooting. And of course we're reading this book. I'm 19. I don't know what's what. I'm like, oh, this is really dark. And then like you get through life, you're like, what? Who wrote that? Like, what was going on? But this is stuff. This is a view of the world. Yeah. Another course, obviously that I took. Well, not obviously, but another course I took that talked about methane. I took an environmental science class, methane produced by cows, and just all of these problems. And it's like, how is this, if this is so terrible, if we are marching towards our end because of deforestation, because of cattle grazing in the Amazon, and like they're farting all over the place, like you're not, but like, and then like, they're feeding them cement and all these things. Like, if this is so bad, how is this such a fundamental piece of our existence? And like, it can't be this way, right? But there's nobody on the other side representing good faith cattle, herdsmen and proprietors that are like, look, that's not reality.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's a lot to unpack right there, Matt. So
like that general sentiment, how do we get to that point where people are so confident in just putting a blanket statement down that's like cattle are bad, cows are bad.
Yeah. So, first, I have to address, for those who are not part of the cattle world, if someone's feeding concrete or cement to cattle, they need to not be farming anymore. That's wrong. There's everything wrong with that. I have never experienced that, and I have been involved in agriculture quite intensively my entire life. But how did we get to this point where that fantastic idea of how we raise agriculture in this world is now being perpetuated everywhere? It's because most people aren't connected to their food. They don't know how their food gets to them. And there's a lot of folks that we could point fingers at. I'm very quick to point fingers at myself as an animal agriculturalist, as being involved in agriculture my entire life, as well as my family. The agriculture community has a tendency to be pretty humble and pretty quiet, and they do the job, they do it well, and that's good enough for them. The big problem is that they're not telling the story. We're not telling our story. I give a lot of talks, and I talk about how I grew up in very rural Northern California, but we have cousins down in the Bay Area, and they would come up and visit, and it was great times. And they always wanted to go pet the cows, and they wanted to go and see the sheep and go pet the horse and things. And we would always just kind of be, oh gosh, we gotta do that again.
Leave them alone.
Like, just leave them alone. Let's just sit and visit for a little bit. But looking back now, I'm grateful for that interest that they had, and they have continued to perpetuate that. They still talk about it at family gatherings, how they used to come up and visit and pet the cow kind of thing. And I wish everybody had that interest, and I wish we had the opportunity to get people out to pet the cow. You come to the University of Idaho, I will happily take you out to pet the cows. I've had people come from all the way across the country because they found me and I was willing to do that. And so in the agriculture community, we're starting to have a bit of a shift change. We're bringing the younger folks in who do realize that communication is very important. We do need to bring others in to learn more about our world. And so that's where the book started. But then it's also something that I've been trying to preach pretty hard for a long time, is that we have to tell our story, because if we don't, somebody else will, and they're probably going to get it wrong.
Right. Like this crazy person with a cement and blah, blah, blah. The book is not bear reading. Let me tell you, I was a pretty hard critic as a 19-year-old for most things, because I was like snarky, after teenager, but I can tell you that was not a fantastic book.
Yeah.
So, don't go running to Amazon to grab it. But look, walk me back.
Yep.
Cows, we reintroduced them, right? We didn't reintroduce them like we did with horses, correct? Like we brought them over.
Right. Yeah. So there, as far as I know, there's no native Bos Taurus, Bos Indicus, Bos Primigenius, which is what they were all from originally, from a Eastern European area. No, so the only native ruminant that would be close to cattle in North America would be bison, but they're not cattle. However, prior to European settlement, it's estimated there's close to 60 million bison in North America. And you think about all of the deer, the elk, the moose, all the other ruminants, antelope, mountain goats. These are all ruminants that are doing the exact same thing as cattle do, which is ferment, feed. They belch out methane. They don't. Cow farts is kind of it's not really a thing. I mean, yeah, I'm sure they have flatulence, but it's this byproduct of their gut fermentation that they belch out. That is the big question and concern right now. Ultimately, if you think about the populations of the native ruminants, which cattle are, and how we've kind of replaced them with our more European style of farming so that we can grow a lot more food. We're probably at a net zero in the amount of methane that has been produced for hundreds of years, thousands of years here in North America. But your original question was, we brought them in, and we absolutely did from Europe because they had been raised there, domesticated there for centuries. And over time, we've identified specific types of animals and created breeds that are more uniform, so they're more predictability when we're breeding them. We have certain animals that are really good at making milk, and certain animals that are really good at making beef. When we were settling, when the Europeans were settling the colonies, we would also bring over draft type animals because they were the tractors of the day. We didn't have tractors. And so over time, these animals have been developed to become more and more of a food source for us here. So yeah, that's
keep going. Don't stop. I want to, because again, we are a hugely beef oriented culture.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. Like, and you go in other places of the world, like I love lamb, right? Lamb sog. I love too. Indian food, you know. Yep. I've actually never had goat.
Okay.
Quite unfortunate.
Oh, we're going to have to fix that.
Yeah, we're going to have to fix that.
You're going to love it.
Oh, I bet I will. I am a huge unrepentant carnivore. But how is it that beef came to dominate the market? Like, we love hamburgers, we love steaks, we love, I mean, like the whole bit. And we just have we've never really bought into wholesale the other options when it comes to protein. Like, yeah, we like chicken, but it's like primarily chicken, beef, then you got some pork, the other white meat, you know, whatever it might be.
You know, my cattle friends out there are probably going to crucify me for saying this, but for folks, if you want meat in your diet and probably the least cost meat in your diet, you're probably best off buying pork right now. From a yield perspective, it's more 100% usable. You get the boneless loin, you go for it. But
I thought you were going to say crickets. Like,
crickets,
get the hell out of here.
I'm not going for crickets. No, I'm not there yet. Not there yet. Chicken has become a very affordable one, and its popularity is because it is very easy to manipulate as far as flavors are concerned, because it tastes like whatever you put on it. Okay. Sure. And it also, we're not going to get into the sciences behind it, but it's good for reheating compared to some of our bigger animals that are more red meat style. The reason that lamb used to be a big part of American society, and in the 1940s, during the World War II and the war in the Pacific specifically, the soldiers down there were fed a lot of what they were calling lamb. Well, it was mostly really old canned mutton coming from Australia. Forage finished, if finished at all. It was just some old sheep that they were slaughtering and sending to the troops. So all those young boys come back from World War II, and the reality is, in the late 1940s, early 1950s, the man made the decisions in the house, like it or not, and said, "I will not have that lamb or sheep meat in this house because it was just trash. So foul. What they were served was not good." I encourage everybody to try lamb, especially American lamb. It's amazing, has great flavor to it. I grew up probably eating more lamb than I did anything else. Your question is about beef, though. Why is beef so popular? And it has been for a very long time now. Recently, as in like the last 20 years, chicken has surpassed beef production in the United States, but beef consumption is still pretty darn strong. And I think it has a lot to do with just culturally, we were Northern Europeans and mostly moving into North America, and Northern Europeans always had cattle around. You'd have the old milk cow, and when she got a little too old, you went ahead and made beef out of her. You also have a lot of the German immigrants that came over in the mid to late 1800s, and beef was a big part of their butchery that they did. Also pork, but beef was a big part of that. And then you transition a little more into, again, that mid 1800s when we were starting to move west, and we had these vast expanses of grassland. You can't raise chickens and pigs out on grassland, but you can raise beef cattle. And then you had the big beef herds out in Texas and Kansas and Nebraska and everything. Then you had Gustavus Swift was the one that really made the move for making beef affordable for the greater population that was growing during the Industrial Revolution, late Industrial Revolution. So think of 1870s through the 1890s. He developed, actually it was somebody else, but he perfected the refrigerated rail car. So it was literally just a rail car where they would hang sides of beef in or sides of meat, but mostly beef at that time. And they had big blocks of ice on both sides. And as long as the train was going, it kept the meat cold. And so now you have the railheads that are closer to the big grasslands in the Central Plains, where the cattle were being raised. We had a lot of them. We had a lot of grassland resources that we could bring the animals to the railhead, slaughter them, and move the beef into the cities where the population centers were. And so we had the resources. And usually, I mean, you look at most cultures out there. What is the thing that they eat the most of? It's mostly based on what are their resources that are available to them. Peruvians eat potatoes because that's where potatoes were native to, right. And then we started transporting those all over the world. But you think of the cultures that always have rice in their diet, and it has probably something to do with their climate and environment that they're working in. Well, in the United States, we had a lot of grassland when we were a burgeoning country, and we utilized that resource. And I think people just got a good taste for beef, and it's become part of our culture. Interestingly enough, down in South America, people think that we eat a lot of beef in the United States, and we certainly do. But Argentina, Uruguay, Brazil.
I was going to say, I know a lot of Brazilians.
They eat way more beef per capita than Americans do. And that's actually a cultural hangover from when the Spanish and Portuguese were moving into South America in the late 1600s, early 1700s. They weren't raising cattle for beef. They were raising it for leather. They wanted the hides and as many as they could get because they were trying to build sailing ships. And again, the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution, we used big leather belts to power all the equipment that was part of the manufacturing. So they needed the hides. Well, as a result, they had a lot of meat sitting around because the hides was the primary thing that they wanted. They wanted the leather. And so these cultures just became major meat eaters because they had it was plentiful. It was very, very abundant. So I think some of that has to do with why we have a lot of beef in our diet, why we have it in certain cultures as well.
Man, that's wild. I mean, obviously it makes sense when you talk about that. One of the big things that people talk about with farming is that problem of, okay, where can you raise these animals and how can you get them to the city centers?
Sure.
And it was the mass transportation of calories, right? Be that vegetables or proteins and stuff that allowed people to condense in an unnaturally essentially manufactured way, right? It's a high rise and stuff. It's like, because you got to go really far away to get enough calories to feed all of those people. So that was essentially what started happening when they were able to transport via rail car. That they were just like, okay, now we can just dump calories after calories after calories that will allow these cities to grow up more and more and more.
Yeah. Well, and you think about it too. We know from a nutritional standpoint that if you can get meat in the diet of people, especially young people, they're going to thrive. But even adults such as ourselves, having meat in the diet really helps us meet all of our actual needs. Calories is one thing. So actually meat isn't very calorie dense, but it's protein dense. And there's so many things that protein is necessary for in the body. It also has specific vitamins that we just can't source from plant bases, or at least it's very, very hard to do.
Right.
But the specific proteins, the amino acids, I was talking about this with my class recently, that there's a professor, Dr. Eric Berg. He's at North Dakota State University. He's absolutely fantastic, hilarious, but also very, very intelligent. And he and I we had a really cool conversation about how he would, if he was king of the world, how he would change the nutritional labels on packages from, if you look there, it tells you how many grams of protein are in many things, and especially like protein bars and things like that. I grab them all the time when I'm on road trips. But the idea is that if we can adjust that to actually talk about what proteins are, what specific amino acids, the things that make up a whole protein, we need specific amino acids in our diet, and you can get your protein or amino acid needs from plants, but it's just it takes a lot more calories because you're taking in a lot more food.
Right.
You meet those needs with animal products: milk, eggs, meat.
Right. And obviously the digestive tract of the animals that are dealing with that volume of foliage are it's not that you don't have people that are vegetarians, right? It's not like the thing I love about being human is that we are just so damn versatile.
Yes.
And we're just scrappy survivalist little monsters, right? That just take over everything. Yeah. And because I've gone through phases where I did, like a carnivore diet, or I did for like a hot minute, I tried it was like the keto diet. But I'm Mexican, so I have a great love for rice and beans. And I've had periods of time where it's like, I'm only eating rice and beans and maybe like cracking an egg and and each time, and I'm also an avid athlete, and each time it would take like a week and then my body would transition and I'm back same optimum performance, at least, that level of athleticism I was. And I love that. It's like, wow, we really can function like a gajillion different ways. Yeah. Like that's obviously why we've taken over the world, at least to some degree. So help me understand this then. We're loving beef. Yeah. Everybody's like industrial revolution. We start shipping it in. Like we're really going for it. Guys come back from World War II. They're like, give me that steak, lady. And they're like, here you go, hon. And, getting after it. Yeah. What happened over the next 70 years from 1950 until 2020 that we go from people coming back and celebrating abundance and access to this food and like being really happy about it to, my year of meats and trying to say that like every cattle farmer is pumping these animals filled with like unspeakable chemicals. And I don't know anything about raising cows. So, perhaps there is somebody out there doing something bad.
Sure.
Great. But that's not the average person. It's certainly not the farmers I've met, right? And the ranchers I've met and dealt with. How did we get to that point where everybody's so excited to vilify animal protein and specifically beef? Because that was the whole like lean meat, not red meat. I have family members who were like, their doctor's like, no red meat ever, ever, ever. Yeah. It's like, okay, but like they're like, well, it's heart stuff. It's like people have been eating this forever. Yeah. It's like, it's not like we just invented this in the 70s. Like, I can't believe it's not butter. Like, we invented that, right? Like cows have been around for a while. We weren't dropping from like obesity and hypertension and all of these problems that are then attributed, like all of the ails of the world that you can't attribute to smoking are dumped on beef. And it's like, you have this vision of somebody smoking a pack a day and eating a steak. And it's just like this disgusting pig.
Yeah. So again, lot to unpack there. I would say, first off, we've come to this point where the vilification is because, again, people aren't connected to their food from the 1950s, and then you get into the baby boom, and you have the great abundance of everything in the 50s and 60s. And you had people the suburbs wasn't a thing until then. And now you have the suburbs that are starting, and the families are growing, and people are moving out and moving away from the farms. A lot of those guys that did fight in World War II, they came from farms, but then they came back and got a job in town. And it was probably a lot easier than working on the farm at that time. And so several generations later, we just have people who are very disconnected from where their food comes from. And then we start getting people who maybe already have an agenda that don't like that we eat animals and that we have to kill them to eat them. And so they start telling stories, and they start telling these really tragic situations of animals that maybe are abused, or the really bad farmer who's doing things wrong and shouldn't be farming or shouldn't be ranching. Or they just start making things up too. And we're playing catch up right now on the animal agriculture side. But I think people are starting to realize that, first off, animal products are a really good thing. Like you mentioned, we've been eating them for a long time as humanity. It's the reason why we as a species can inhabit just about everywhere in the globe. You're not getting fresh strawberries and lettuce in Nunavut, Canada. Right. If you don't know where that is, look it up. But it's way the heck north. Up there. It's far north. I mean, but as a species, we can survive on those animal products. Well, we are very well designed to handle animal products, and using those animals to our benefit, so that we can thrive, will ultimately make it better for everybody. So if we're meeting our nutritional needs, we're probably not going to need to expand farmland. We're gonna be able to use what we have. But using these animals specifically, especially like cattle or sheep or goats, these are ruminant animals. What that means is they have a very specialized digestive tract, as you've already mentioned, and they can eat grass. We can eat grass. We will not thrive on grass. We will starve to death eating grass. We can eat all the grass we want. You can eat all the lettuce you want. We cannot break the bonds that are part of, those are actually carbohydrates. They really are, but they're structural carbohydrates that our digestive tract can't gain access to the sugars that are in there. But ruminants can, and they take that and turn it into meat and milk and all these other cool byproducts that come from that. And so, to say that these animals are dangerous and that we should stay away from eating meat, I think it's absolutely the opposite. We need to be considering the magic of these creatures. You mentioned how miraculous humans are, that we are very adaptable, and why we can inhabit all corners of the globe. These ruminant animals are part of that whole spider web of life, and they're there to take those plant material that we can't thrive on and turn it into something that we truly can. And think about the state of Idaho. We have a lot of wilderness area. If you've traveled around in the state of Idaho and you've gone out into the Sawtooths, or I just drove down 95 and I drove through Riggins, you're not farming in Riggins. You're not farming on those Sawtooth Mountains. If there's any layer of soil there, farming it would cause erosion, would cause whatever little bit of soil's gone. But then at the same time, you're also farming on a 45-degree angle. You can't do that. But we could put cattle out there, and they will travel, and they will graze, and they will knock down wildfire potential, right? I mean, they're gonna eat down the grasses, and as long as we're managing appropriately, they're turning ground that we can't use for food into food. That's amazing. Yeah, that's a miracle.
They have like 6 stomachs, right?
Four compartments to their stomachs.
Okay, somebody told me recently that they eat and then throw up and then eat again and then throw up again and then just go back and forth and like gorge themselves and then just go lie down. It's like me after Thanksgiving, just like.
Well, let's think about that. So it's actually kind of a survival skill that nature has developed. So they're prey animals. They're not predators. They're prey animals because they're herbivores.
Sure.
And they like to live in their little herds. But then the idea was that the animal would go out, they'd eat a bunch, they'd fill up that first gut called the rumen. It's about 80% of their upper digestive tract, the stomach areas. Okay. They'd fill that up and then they'd go back to a safe place like the herd or like into a little valley or something, and where they're going to be safe from predators, but they also have this nice full gut. But because it's forage, because it's grass mostly, the animal is they need time to break that down, and they need to allow for the microbes that are in their rumen to do their fermentation and do their work. Okay.
Because it's no longer mechanical, right? They're not chomping.
Well, it is, but it is mechanical. That's the regurgitation they do.
Sure.
So if
I meant with the microbes, right? Like, because you need time for the chemicals and the
enzymes to break it down. Yeah. You definitely need that. The regurgitation that they do, they're just taking that plant material and making it even smaller, but increasing surface area so that the microbes can work even more efficiently. If you've ever seen a cow chewing its cud, that's what it's doing. It just regurgitated into its mouth. It's chewing now with its molars. It's not tearing with the incisors. It's chewing with its molars, making that smaller. But usually it's a sign that they are content and that they feel safe, because they're not going to do that if they're not.
They're just having a little snack. That's so gross. It's like it's like taking a brown paper bag. Like, I'm just going to save this sandwich for later. And it's like, except instead of taking a bite, you're like, oh, there it is. Yeah. Fantastic.
Yeah.
So talk to me about the burden then that we are currently experiencing with small production farmers. Right, like I talk to the people at FARE Idaho a ton. Right? And they in fact connected us.
Love FARE Idaho. Yep.
Love them. And they're doing things like connecting small production farmers, essentially making a network of them so that these small production farmers can fulfill larger obligations to like restaurants and whatnot. Sure. They're like, I need 500 pounds, per week or per month or whatever. And they put together enough producers to fulfill that 500. Right. So it's like, but that's a really unique thing. What FARE is doing is fantastic and really revolutionary in this area. I'm not saying that nobody's ever done it, but it's like they're connecting the processors, the consumers, the producers, the whole thing. This is an evolution of managing a problem that small-time producers have, as we have larger and larger and larger national meat production industries that are looking primarily to deliver a very specific set of products, right? Like I want my ribeyes, my New Yorks, my chuck, my ground beef. They're producing those en masse very, very cheaply and populating or filling places like Costco. And then the small-time producers like, okay, on an average animal, like how many ribeyes do you get out of a cow? Like if you were to harvest a cow, like
just
4?
Depends on how thin you cut them.
Let's say 1 inch thick.
1 inch thick. 1 inch thick out of a normal size beef animal, you're probably going to get about 20 ribeye steaks.
Great. So like if you have to raise a whole animal just to get 20 steaks and that's the only thing you're getting out of it, you have all kinds of problems, right? How did we get to that point? Is it really just the evolution of the larger national level meat producers, or is it also a kind of a modification of the way that consumers behave in the United States, where I'm really only looking for like 2 cuts, right? So that's why the producers produce that, or is it the producers made that stuff because it was the easiest to get, and then I learned how to only cook those things? Like what has contributed to the small time farmer getting pushed out?
Well, okay. So first off, I do want to lay it out all on the table that I work with large producers. I work with small producers. Sure. As long as they're doing the right thing, I'm happy to engage with them. And so a lot of it comes down to what is it that what they want their business model to look like. Sure. So there's a lot of great cattle producers, especially in the state of Idaho, that run several hundred, if not 1,000 head of cattle. Okay. Because that is their main job, they don't have the time or the resources to be able to market those individual animals. And so they go through the traditional commodity chains, and we have much larger processors that are out there that, because they're larger, they're more efficient. And so they can utilize byproducts actually a lot better than a lot of our smaller processors. Now, flip that around. And if a producer wants to really target and build a brand specifically to them and sell directly to the consumers, there's a lot more profit margin potential there, but it also takes a lot more effort too. And so the reason that the industry has become so segmented, especially in cattle, is because they're a big animal and it takes a lot more resources to manage those animals, especially land. So if you're thinking about of that much larger herd, it's really hard for that family to market direct to consumer. If we're looking at smaller herds, and actually the average herd size in the United States is 40 head of cattle. So yeah, it's and that's mostly because, people like my wife and I, we have our dozen animals that it's a cattle habit. It's not a business. It's more of a habit. So it's a vice that we have. But
I bet you geek out on cattle. Like some people geek out on chickens. They're like, oh, I got this chicken and this chicken and this chicken. You're like, I got a red one and I got this one and I got a
100%. They all have their own personality. We know each one. We know each one very, very specifically. So, but folks that maybe just have a small acreage, you can raise livestock on there. But to make it a profitable endeavor, if you're a really small outfit, you need to probably market direct to consumer. If you're more of a legacy ranch, and we have century ranches here in the state of Idaho where it's been 5 generations on that same place, and they've been able to accumulate more ground. They can run more cattle there, but for them to market direct to consumer, it's just really hard for them to do. And so they utilize the more traditional avenues where they'll sell to either the next segment in line, so a feed yard or a grower of some sort, and then that goes into the larger packing houses. But we have large packing houses, small packing houses, and again, as long as they're doing the right thing for the customer and especially for the animal, then I'm all for it.
Yeah, and let me be clear. I was not attempting to imply that a large production company has done something wrong. No. Right? Like there was that wonderful South Park. Do you ever watch South Park? Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Years ago.
I mean, I used to.
There was this one where they had the Underpants Gnomes came out and it was all about Starbucks, right? So Harbucks Coffee moves into town.
Okay.
And it's this whole episode about how terrible Harbucks Coffee is, right? And overwhelmingly, they like come to the climax of the episode and, like Stan and Kenny and whatever, Cartman have to do some project where they, it's like they're trying to hang the guy in the town square. Geez. And they do this presentation and it's all about like how corporations are actually good entities. They're like, because the coffee in this town is terrible. Like they had the mom and pop coffee house and the sheriff would walk in and they'd be like, do you want your more normal sheriff? He's like, yes. And they took a cat and just hit him in the face instead of giving him a cup of coffee. Anyway, I don't prefer Starbucks, but my point is like, there is absolutely a place for us to have, consistency in our food supply. Yep. What I also think, to your earlier point, which is people being removed from the food production system, that seems to be getting solved by some of the direct consumer outfits, which is like, listen, I love it. Like McIntyre Farms or McIntyre Pastures. I don't know whichever one they do. Sure. But, McIntyre, we get stuff from them like, dude, you can come hang out with the pigs. You can come see, like, come anytime you want. Like, it's totally fine. Kids can run around for the weekend and whatever. And you have that capacity to be like, okay, I'm connected again. Right? Like, I'm back. You're not doing that if there are 10,000 cows, right? Or like 20,000 head. Like, it's not going to happen. Not that those people are bad. Like, I like going to In-N-Out. Sure. I love In-N-Out. Yeah. I like going to In-N-Out and getting my burger and knowing that the burger will be there. But then on the regular, I also want connectivity. I want, understanding. I want to see that things are going okay. Because I think there's such a difficult, there's like this cloud over the food industry that started with like, The Jungle, the book, and like all of these different stories. Like, is there a hand in here? Did someone die? Like, am I inadvertently
is killing? There a Band-Aid in my
am I inadvertently killing people by eating this? And I want to get away from that too, right?
Yeah. I think I applaud you for wanting to make that connection. I strongly believe there are many people out there that also want to make that connection. I mean, it's the whole agro-tourism thing that's kind of popped up and continues to grow. And I have friends back home in my hometown that have started doing more of that. Not only does that help connect people, but it's also diversification of their portfolio, essentially, if you think about it from a business standpoint. But yeah, I that's where I go out and I try to preach the good word of agriculture to as many people as I can, but I also turn and point back to the farmers and say, guys, we have to embrace this interest. We have to bring them in. And, sometimes it's really hard to get people to those large ranches. I think about the Kemps. This is a family operation in the Sandhills of Nebraska. They have 1,000 head of cattle. It's a husband and wife team. And I think it's about an hour and a half drive to the nearest town. And it's just hard to bring people to something like that.
Right.
Or you think about the state of Idaho and Bruno, Idaho. I don't know how many people are driving through Bruno, but not many, right?
Wait, how far away is Bruno?
Bruno's from here probably 4 hours maybe.
Oh my God, road trip.
Let's go to Bruno. It's a beautiful area.
Let's bring the cameras.
I mean, you talk about some gorgeous high desert, but it's just not where the population is. And so,
it's not pragmatic to do that.
It's hard to do that.
But in the absence of that
thank you for having the interest.
Right.
My goodness. Gosh, I come to Moscow and I will let you pet the cows.
Man, I'm coming. But that's the connection that needs to be made again, right?
Yep.
Like, I think one of the most beautiful things about the agriculture industry in Idaho is that it is so fundamental here. And it's not all just tourism. It's like, no, this is functional. And we are buying from those. Like, you go to what is it, like a county fair or something like that back in our former state. There's like, you'd have a pig, it's like
the junior livestock auction,
exactly.
Right? Yep.
Exactly. But that was kind of like just a side throwaway thing. Like it was a time from a bygone era, right? That was like people were still clinging on to it. But here it's very functional. It's like, no, that's Brad. Like those are Brad's cattle, and I buy from Brad, and those are the chickens. He has wild chickens too. Like the chickens are so good. Like people.
Do they all have names? Like
I don't know. But I've gotten their chicken before, and it is so good. Like it blew my. I almost got like mad. I'm like, we eat a lot of chicken. I eat a lot of chicken, a lot of beef. Big fan. Pork is delicious too. Yeah. But I had their chicken. We got one of their whole roaster chickens and we cooked it. And I was like, this is so like succulent. Yeah. I don't know how they did it, but it was really good. That's all I'm going to say. You got to try it if you haven't. But
sure.
Yeah. But it's that kind of thing where we reconnect. Yeah. Right. And of course, at some level, it's not going to be practical to do that. But to the degree that we can here is we do have proximity to functional people that are members of the community that is like, no, this is my jam. Like Matt McIntyre at one point, I think was like a board of education member and who's a farmer and like, I just love that there's that integration here. It's not like, no, you stay out there and like, we'll be over here. It's like, no, he's your neighbor. Like, that's it.
Yeah. If it didn't freak out all the cattlemen, I would invite everybody to the Idaho Cattle Association convention. There's a gathering, an annual gathering of a lot of the movers and shakers, big and small cattle producers in the state of Idaho that get together, and surrounding states, because we just have a really cool cattle culture here in the state of Idaho. You talk about bringing these people to connect not just with the animals, but with the actual human that's raising these. And Idaho's a great example of, we have 2 million head of cattle in the state of Idaho. We have 1.2 million people. So we're outnumbered by cattle. It is very much an agricultural state. The question just comes down to, how can we make that connection with the general public, with folks who have interests like yourself, and get them out there so they can see what's happening. You think about, you mentioned McIntyre Farms, and you have that direct connection to the meat that you're purchasing. And I think that's absolutely fantastic. I would love, if I was king of the world, and if I had the unlimited resources, I'd pile people in buses and take them to all these other cattle ranches that are throughout the state, but then also take them to CS Beef Packers in Kuna, to the new beef plant in Jerome, or right down the street to Scarro's Meats, who's also in Jerome. Difference in hundreds of head a day versus couple head of processing today. But show them that you're still purchasing from local Idaho producers in many cases. But the cool thing about some of the bigger outfits is that, because yes, we have a lot of people who are either intimidated by cooking meat, which is a real thing, and we need to fix that. We need to teach people how to cook again. But steaks are easy. Steaks are quick. There's easy cleanup.
Right.
You close the grill and you eat. That's it.
So
you're done,
great.
right?
Yeah.
Versus grandma's pot roast. Not many people know what to do with that. It's intimidating. It's harder to deal with, but we're starting to get a pretty cool culture with things like the Food Network and the celebrity chefs and everybody talking about, let's slow that cooking process down a little bit. And let's talk about some of these more, I wouldn't call them labor intensive, but meats that you have to think a little bit more about.
Like more niche cuts, things you're not going to find at Costco.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, and even then you can still find it at Costco. It's just that not everybody knows what to do with it. Right. Yeah. So, but that's why we've become, in many cases, some of those larger entities, because we have groups in the country and throughout the world where, we have a big ribeye contingency, or we have the Californians who eat tri-tip and then bring their cultural cuisine with them. There's a lot of parts of the country that still don't even know what a tri-tip is, right?
Okay. To this point, I got a buddy named Dustin or Dusty. I can't remember what Dust something. Anyway, the point
sounds like a good friend.
He's great. He's a good guy. He was a coach of my kids' basketball team. And look, we've never had beers together. That's not my point. I got a dude that I know. All right.
Copy.
And he's from Oklahoma. And I was saying something about oh yeah, you guys should come over. Like, we'll cook some tri-tip. He's like, what is with tri-tip? I was like, what the hell is wrong with you? Like, all I knew growing up is that to be a real man, you had to get to the point where you could crush a tri-tip.
Yeah.
Like, don't burn it.
Yeah.
Don't, like, this whole thing, and it's got to be good. Yeah. Tip to tip to tip. Like, 3 tips, right? See what I did there? Yeah. And like, to this day, I have finally, at the ripe age of 42, I've gotten to the point where I'm like, I can consistently rock a tri-tip to the point where people will inevitably say like, that's the best tri-tip I've ever had. Like, awesome. Can't believe you cooked it that way. Yeah. I also am a big fan. I've gotten away from doing big hunks, and I do these like paper thin slices to the point where you don't even need to bring a knife to the table. You're just, or like somebody will walk by the cutting board and just snag a little piece. It's like, boom, you hand them
and
out.
you're best friends at that point too.
Oh, just like boom, 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 boom. Oh, I'm a huge fan.
Well, So to that point, growing up where I didn't know what to do with a brisket. Brisket was the obligatory St. Patrick's Day corned beef, and then the rest of the time we just cut it up into stew because we didn't know what to do with it. And now that's blasphemous to the barbecue world. Right. But that has exploded because people from Texas and Oklahoma and Kansas City have moved around and brought their cuisine with them. And so thankfully we do have areas of the country that still pull through on certain cuts. But we're starting to get a lot more mixing. And I think that's going to be your solution to your original question, is that why are we focused so heavily on ribeyes or strip loins or sirloins or whatever, where we still have vast communities of folks that do eat all those other pieces and parts. And that's where some of the bigger outfits they have better logistics and transportation. Let's just be honest. And that's how they distribute all of the cuts as a difference from a smaller processor that is a little bit more community bound. And so if you can work with those guys, awesome, do that. But it's also kind of the reality of we have to sell the whole animal. And with the family in the Sandhills of Nebraska, for them to market direct to consumer, I mean, their nearest neighbor is a half hour away. So
not many.
So it's not
Jim, do you want some?
Right.
I'll take 2.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of how the industry has evolved. But I absolutely love what FARE's doing, and I work with FARE quite regularly because they are trying to make that connection back to the consumer. And I do cutting demonstrations for them and talk about meat. That's my thing. Yeah. But I'm a meathead. That's a term of endearment within my community. Okay. But what they're doing is trying to make that connection again. And there's so many great farmers and ranchers in the state of Idaho, especially, that we do need to tell their story. Yeah.
One real specific question. You were talking about different areas. Micro, right? Dirty Jobs,
Love
Micro.
Yep.
He had, I can't remember if it was a TED Talk or an interview or something, but he was talking about learning how they castrated, I think it was like goats or lambs
They did
or something.
sheep up in Wyoming.
There you go. Yeah. And he was articulating, he's like, this guy holds it down with like rip and just rips. And he's like, this is not humane. And he's like, what about the rubber band? And you articulate this as well in your book in saying like, look, we have this idea that raising animals and producing meat is supposed to be this like, really controlled, sterilized, humane process. And to that end, castration, you have like the rubber bands and the rubber band goes on, the sack. And then like days later it falls off and it's this thing. And confronting the realities of like, look, this is how you're going to have to deal with these animals. Like, yeah, you could do the rubber band and it's going to be days of, discomfort, or you could just do the like, and that's going to be, surgically. And that's not going to be the most fun. He's not happy about it, but it's over reasonably quickly.
Yeah.
Do you worry about integrating lay people like myself into the actual realities? It's like somebody you don't have kids yet. Somebody who you stay with like a family, like your one friend who has the first kid and you like stay with them and you think it's going to be awesome. Like, oh, right. And then you're like, oh my God, like, what are you? Oh my God. It's like, those are the realities of raising a family, right? Like kids are fighting. There's poo everywhere. It's like somebody's
biology is dirty. Yes. Yeah.
That's a great way, but biology is dirty. And I have to imagine the cattle industry is no exception. Again, I'm an ignorant, just civilian wandering through this. But like, do you worry about that? Because I feel like it's so ripe with like, oh, now I don't want to eat beef. It's like, well, damn it. That's not why I invited you to the ranch, right?
No. Okay. Couple things. I mean, first off, you would be surprised how many people just want to know. How do you do this? What is it that you're doing and why? We're not so castration of young bulls is a common thing. One reason is for meat quality, but the other is for safety. If we let these bulls get to full size, they have a lot of testosterone in them, and they could be a rather dangerous animal. So there's a couple different reasons why we do that, and we do it as young as possible. So that we inflict the least amount of discomfort to that animal. Okay. And you mentioned the surgical procedure. So yeah, we can cut into the scrotum, we can remove the testicles, and it's done. And if we do it at a really, really young age, the animal doesn't have a whole lot of nerves, in that area anyway yet. But we also have the banding technique. So if you think about, for those out there, and you take a rubber band and put it on your finger and let it sit there for about a minute, that's eventually going to start cutting off circulation. Well, we do the same thing with some of those cases. And actually, there's some really cool products out there that now have impregnated lidocaine. So using the rubber band would actually be not only a cleaner, easier step, but also be providing some analgesic.
That's fantastic!
Isn't that so cool? Dude, I'm super excited about this stuff.
This stuff. That's wild.
Animal scientists.
Yeah. So, okay. People smarter than me.
It's a thing. So, but there's the other group of folks that are out there that, you know what? I'm okay with not knowing where my food came from, as long as it's there, it's safe and affordable.
Right.
And that's fine too. But for those who do want to know, I love bringing folks out and exposing them to the environments. And so often I've had the opportunity in previous jobs and then currently to help people who aren't from the agricultural community to come and experience what it is that we do. And so often they leave with a whole new perspective of it's a lot of hard work. And many people say, you know what? We're not paying enough for food with all the hard work that goes into it. But oftentimes too, they're just like, oh, now I understand why you do that. It makes sense.
Right.
And so we just have to have that communication and tell a story. I teach animal science at the University of Idaho. That's a 4-year degree. It takes a long time to tell that story. And when you leave with that 4-year degree, you don't know everything. There's so much more to learn, but we're just trying to cover the basis. Well, now translate to the general public that doesn't have agricultural background and maybe are several generations removed. We have a lot of storytelling to do and explanation. And in the end, we need to tell that story, and we need to embrace folks like yourself that want to learn more and get out there and tell that story.
Dr. Phil, look, you drove all the way here. I appreciate it. I know you have a lecture you got to get to and a lot of other things. Hopefully first of many with our conversation, is there anything you'd like to hit right here at the end?
If you're curious, reach out. If you're curious and you maybe know a farmer, go talk to them. Learn what they do. You'd be surprised how many of them do what they do because they're passionate. It's not a lucrative business, contrary to what some might believe. They drive big trucks because they have big animals to drive around. They don't drive big trucks because they just want the coolest new Raptor that just came down the road. So find out what it is that they do. Find out that they're real people. And make that connection. And if they can sell you some goods at the same time, by all means, let's do that. Let's make that direct to consumer connection. And if anybody ever really wants to reach out, please do. My email is really easy. It's pbass@uidaho.edu. Yeah. And send me an email. And if you're in the Moscow area, I'd be happy to take you out and pet the cows.
Dude, I want to come see your cows so bad. I'll have to do a trip up there. We'll do a conversation on location.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for coming out, sir. I appreciate you.
Thank you.